At 5 a.m., when the world is supposed to be asleep, when men are most vulnerable inside the illusion of safety, someone was already watching. Not from the shadows of some alley, not from a distant rooftop, from the edge of a backyard, from inside a workplace, from behind a cubicle wall. You think horror lives in abandoned hospitals and crime documentaries. You think monsters look the part. But the most disturbing truth, the predator often sits 3 feet away from you, sharing fluorescent lighting and office coffee. Tonight, I'm not telling you ghost stories. I'm pulling you into something far more dangerous. 3 true Coworker horror stories. Real men, real workplaces, real moments where the mask slipped. And here's what makes this different. This isn't just about fear, it's about awareness. It's about understanding the psychology of the modern predator, the kind trained by society to blend in, to weaponize normalcy, to hide in plain sight. You've been taught to fear the dark, but no one taught you to fear the familiar. The first man was 20 years old, an internship, a financial office downtown, the kind of place where ambition is currency and reputations are built behind spreadsheets. 8 interns packed into low cubicles, harmless, professional, safe, except one of them wasn't. His name was Alex. Tall, pale, quiet, slightly off, the kind of guy you dismiss as socially awkward, the kind you don't want to judge too quickly because we're conditioned to tolerate discomfort in the name of politeness. That's the first trap. He didn't start with threats. He started with proximity, leaning over the cubicle wall, rising slowly into view like something testing the surface of water, smiling too long, speaking in a forced, unnatural voice, almost theatrical, like he was rehearsing something. Every day, not random, not scattered, targeted. Only at him. And that's how psychological control begins, with repetition, with creating a pattern, with making you question whether you're overreacting. Because once a man starts doubting his instincts, he's already losing ground. You need to understand something right now. The first stage of every predator, social, psychological, physical, is normalization. And this one had just begun. This is only the surface.
You felt it, didn't you? That subtle tightening in your chest when I described him rising above that cubicle wall. That wasn't entertainment. That was instinct. And instinct is the one weapon modern men have been trained to ignore. Every day, Alex would appear the same way, slowly, methodically, like he was conditioning a response. His head would lift over the divider, just his face visible, stretched grin, eyes locked, voice lowered into something unnatural. Not random conversation, performance. There's something deeply predatory about performance when it's directed at a single target. He wasn't trying to be funny. He was trying to test boundaries. See, men like that don't start with violence. They start with psychological occupation. They insert themselves into your mental space until you're carrying them home without realizing it. And that's exactly what happened. The intern laughed it off. The others thought it was quirky. That's how predators survive in groups, by disguising obsession as eccentricity. But Alex didn't do it to everyone. He chose one. He leaned longer each week, stayed hovering, smiled without blinking, sometimes saying nothing at all. Silence can be more aggressive than words. Silence forces you to fill the space, to self-soothe, to rationalize. He's just awkward. He's trying too hard. He doesn't know how to socialize. That's how men override alarms. You've done it before. In a bar, in a workplace, in a friendship. You felt something was off, and you negotiated with your own gut. Because society punishes men who overreact. But predators rely on that. Then, one night, 6 weeks in, the phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. Silence on the line, and then that voice, the same forced tone, louder now, less playful, more intentional. The tide's coming in. Pull your boat out of the water. That's not a joke. That's a message, a riddle designed to create uncertainty. And uncertainty is control. Then laughter, unhinged, prolonged, detached. Click. Here's the detail that should make every man watching this sit forward. He never gave Alex his number, not once. So now the game shifts. It's no longer awkwardness, it's access. And access without permission is power. Let me ask you something. How many people right now know where you live? How many could get your number in under 5 minutes? We live in an era where information is currency, and unstable men can weaponize it. That phone call wasn't random, it was escalation, and escalation means intent. But what happened next proves this wasn't attention-seeking, it was planning.
The following Monday, Alex was gone. No dramatic exit, no confrontation, just an empty desk. That's how calculated men disappear, not with chaos, but with silence. The supervisor said he'd been fired at the end of the previous week. Poor performance, ignored warnings, no access to employee contact sheets, no reason to have anyone's personal number. Which means the number wasn't convenience, it was effort. Understand this, effort changes everything. A man who goes out of his way to access you without permission is not acting on impulse, he's operating on intention. The intern told his supervisor about the call, about the voice, about the message, about the laughter. Other interns admitted they'd felt uneasy around Alex too, but unease without action is meaningless. We are trained to normalize red flags until they bleed into routine. The supervisor reassured him Alex was gone, no reason to worry. That's what institutions do. They reduce threat to paperwork. They treat instability like a performance review issue. But predators don't vanish because a manager says so. They detach from the system and reattach privately. For a week, nothing happened. And here's the psychological trick. Silence after escalation creates a false sense of safety. Your nervous system resets. You convince yourself it's over. You go back to normal routines. You lower your guard. That's when he showed up. Friday, 5 a.m., still dark, that gray pre-dawn light where shadows look thicker than they are.
He woke up to a sound outside, maybe a branch, maybe wind, but something felt wrong enough to pull him to the window, and there he was, standing in the backyard, not hiding, not pacing, standing, looking up at the window. You need to picture this clearly. A man who no longer works with you, a man who acquired your number without permission, a man who delivered a cryptic message days earlier, now physically present at your home before sunrise. That's not coincidence. That's surveillance. That's location tracking. That's premeditation. For a few seconds, he couldn't move. This is what shock does. It freezes the body while the mind races. And then, clear as day, Alex called his name. In that same voice, dragged out, mocking, like the cubicle performance had finally evolved into its final stage. The laughter came again, louder, detached, almost joyous. And here's the most disturbing part. He didn't try to break in. He didn't run. He just stood there long enough to confirm something. Access. He could reach him anywhere. Work, phone, home. That's dominance psychology. You don't attack immediately. You demonstrate capability. And once a man realizes someone can access him without warning, he will never sleep the same way again. He called the police, but by the time they arrived, Alex was gone. No forced entry, no direct threat, no crime, just presence. And presence is enough to alter a man permanently. But this wasn't the only story. This was just the first descent.
The police asked the most predictable question in the world. Is he still there? When the answer was no, the urgency dissolved. Call back if he returns. Call back if he breaks in. Call back if he threatens you directly. In other words, call us when it's too late. This is a truth most men learn the hard way. The system does not protect you from potential. It responds to damage. Alex hadn't broken a window. He hadn't kicked down a door. He hadn't touched him. He had simply stood there, laughing. And that thin line between technically harmless and psychologically invasive is where predators thrive. The summer continued. No more calls, no more backyard visits. The internship ended. A job offer came. Life appeared to stabilize. But here's what doesn't stabilize: the nervous system. Once a man has experienced targeted intrusion, he becomes aware of fragility. Locks feel thinner, windows feel transparent, silence at night feels louder. Years passed, different job, different company, but the memory remained, not of violence, of laughter, that unhinged, detached laughter in the dark. Here's what most people misunderstand about fear. It isn't always about what someone does, it's about what they prove they can do. Alex proved he could cross boundaries without consequence. He proved he could gather information quietly. He proved he could appear without warning and then disappear. That changes a man. It rewires how he scans environments, how he evaluates strangers, how he trusts coworkers. But this isn't just about one unstable intern. This is about something deeper. Modern workplaces force proximity between strangers with no psychological vetting.
You share space, data, routines, lunch breaks, sometimes even personal conversations with people whose inner world you know nothing about. We are told to collaborate. We are told to be inclusive. We are told to ignore discomfort in the name of professionalism. And predators exploit that culture. They hide behind HR policies. They mask obsession as awkwardness. They escalate slowly enough to avoid triggering institutional response. Until they don't. Now, you might be thinking, maybe Alex was just mentally unstable. Maybe he needed help. Maybe. But instability combined with access is dangerous, and access is easier than ever. Remember that, because the second story proves something even darker. This time, it wasn't a man being watched. It was a 17-year-old girl. Small town, grocery store, quiet life, and a coworker who didn't look like a threat until he did.
17 years old. First job. Small town grocery store where everyone knows everyone. The kind of place where danger feels fictional. Where parents say, "Nothing bad ever happens here." That sentence alone has buried more red flags than any lie ever told. She liked the job. Cash register, slow hours, coworkers gathering near the front to talk about TV shows and weekend plans, ordinary life, predictable rhythm, safety built from repetition. Then there was Sean, 24, quiet, slightly awkward, worked in dairy, not charismatic, not dominant, not the type anyone would label dangerous. And that's the lesson. Danger rarely announces itself with confidence. Sometimes it announces itself with politeness. At first, interaction was minimal, nods in passing, nothing memorable. Until the group chat. This is how modern proximity begins, digital access. He started messaging her privately, shifts, schedules, casual questions, innocent on the surface. Then slowly, personal life, music preferences, weekend plans, what she did after work. Each question small enough to defend. That's how grooming works. It hides inside normalcy. He began calling her cute, flirting in ways that made her uncomfortable, messages arriving late at night, not overtly threatening, just persistence. Persistence is a signal most people ignore because society teaches women to avoid confrontation and men to avoid appearing paranoid. She tried to brush it off. He just doesn't understand social cues. He's awkward. There it is again, rationalization overriding instinct. But here's the psychological pivot point. One day at work, coworkers were chatting about television shows, and Sean asked her casually, "You like Stranger Things, right?" She froze. She hadn't told anyone at work she was watching it, which means he learned it elsewhere. Social media, online activity, passive surveillance. And that's when fear starts, when someone demonstrates unseen observation. It's not about the show, it's about the fact that he was watching her without her awareness. Days later, she was lying in bed when she heard tapping on her window, light, deliberate. She checked, nothing there. You could argue coincidence, wind, branches, but fear doesn't need proof, it needs pattern. The messages escalated. Finally, she told him directly she wasn't interested, and that's when the mask slipped.
"Okay," he replied. "Good luck changing your address." That isn't flirting. That's territorial assertion. That's dominance through implied surveillance. And once again, the system would have to react, but not before the psychological damage was done.
Good luck changing your address. Read that in your mind. That isn't anger. That isn't heartbreak. That's a declaration. It says, "I know where you live." In one sentence, he shifted the dynamic from awkward coworker to potential stalker. And here's what most men need to understand. Predators don't always escalate because they're emotional. They escalate because they feel entitled. Entitled to attention, entitled to access, entitled to proximity. When she rejected him, it wasn't just social embarrassment. In his mind, it was defiance. So he responded with implied control. She did what too many people hesitate to do. She documented everything. Screenshots, saved messages. She went to her manager. She went to the police with her father. Paperwork began. Restraining order initiated. Sean was fired on the spot. On paper, the system worked. But here's the truth no one says out loud. A restraining order is not a force field. It's a piece of paper backed by consequence if consequence can arrive in time. That's the gap predators live inside. The weeks after were not peaceful. They were hypervigilant. Every noise outside the window became a potential threat. Every unknown number became a risk. Locks were checked twice, then 3 times. Sleep became shallow. This is what psychological invasion does. It extends far beyond physical proximity. Even if he never returned, even if he never came near her house again, he altered her internal world. That's power. The most effective predators don't always need to touch you. They just need you to imagine what they could do. Months passed. No incidents. The restraining order held. Eventually, normal life resumed. But awareness never fully left. And that's the paradox. Fear can weaken a person, or it can sharpen them. She learned to trust her instincts earlier, to take subtle red flags seriously, to stop minimizing discomfort for the sake of politeness. That is growth born from threat. But don't miss the pattern forming. First story, access without permission. Second story, surveillance without consent. Now we go deeper, because the third story removes digital distance. No backyard, no window tapping, just a storm, a locked office, and a man who decided the outside world was no longer an option. 26 years old. Small insurance office in a quiet corner of Pennsylvania. One long row of desks, flickering fluorescent lights, coffee that tastes like burnt routine. The kind of place where nothing dramatic is supposed to happen. And that's exactly why it did. Storm warnings flooded the local news that morning. Heavy rain, high winds, the kind of weather that makes the sky look bruised. Most employees were sent home early. Only 2 people stayed behind to finish paperwork. Her and Tom. Early 30s, quiet, observant, the type who blended into the background so well you barely registered him.
not charismatic, not aggressive, just present, always nearby. If she went to the coffee machine, he appeared minutes later. If she restocked paper, he was suddenly doing the same. Coincidence can happen once. Pattern is intention. By 5 p.m., the storm was violent, lightning flashing every few seconds, thunder shaking the building. The office felt hollow without the usual chatter, just rain pounding against glass. Isolation is an accelerant. When environments empty out, power dynamics shift. At 6:30, the lights flickered. Both laughed nervously. Then the power died. Emergency lights bathed everything in dim orange, and that's when control moved from subtle to structural. She suggested leaving. He didn't respond. Instead, she heard keys, the front door locking. "Not safe to go outside," he muttered. On the surface, it sounds protective, but listen closely. Protection without request is control. She tried to call her boyfriend. No cell signal. Storm knocked out the tower. She tried the landline. Dead. Now understand what just happened. Limited exit points. No communication. 2 people. Darkness. This is how containment begins. She turned, and Tom was standing in the doorway, holding a flashlight under his chin, casting shadows upward across his face. Half smile. That detail matters. Predators often test reactions through humor. If she laughed, he could frame it as a joke. If she panicked, he could say she was overreacting. He told her again it wasn't safe to leave. But here's the difference between care and confinement. Care offers options. Confinement removes them. And when she went to check the back door, it was chained shut from the inside. That wasn't weather. That was preparation. This wasn't awkwardness. This wasn't coincidence. This was containment engineered before the storm ever hit.
The back door was chained from the inside, looped tight, padlocked. That's not something you do in panic. That's something you do in anticipation. Now imagine the shift in her body at that moment, the realization that this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't social awkwardness. This wasn't storm anxiety. This was a controlled environment. You need to understand something about human predators. They don't rely on chaos. They create controlled conditions where chaos benefits them. Storm outside, power out, phones dead, doors locked. Isolation engineered. She turned and saw the faint glow of his flashlight at the end of the hallway. Not rushing, walking slowly. That's confidence. She slipped into a supply closet and closed the door quietly, breathing shallow, heart pounding so loud she thought it would give her away. And then he called her name, softly, comfortingly. "I just want to make sure you're safe." That sentence is chilling for one reason. It weaponizes protection. Protection is the oldest manipulation tactic in human psychology. If you position yourself as the guardian, you gain authority over the guarded. But she didn't respond. Silence. 10 minutes felt like 10 hours. Thunder cracked above the building. Rain intensified. Something in the roof began leaking. Nature was loud enough to hide movement. When she finally cracked the closet door, the hallway was empty. The flashlight beam gone. She moved carefully toward the front.
And what she saw next shattered the illusion completely. The front glass door had been smashed, shattered inward, rain blowing across the floor. Tom was gone. Let that settle in. He locks the doors, cuts communication, chains the back exit, roams the hallway, calls her name, then vanishes, leaving a dramatic exit point. There are two possibilities here. One, he panicked. Two, he intended something darker and something interrupted it. His car was still in the lot the next morning, unlocked, keys inside, wallet, phone. Security cameras manually turned off before the power outage. He had prepared. And then he disappeared. Never seen again. No arrest, no explanation, just absence. This is the part that unsettles men the most, not knowing motive, not knowing what would have happened if she hadn't hidden. Predators don't always finish the act. Sometimes they are stopped by circumstance, sometimes by fear, sometimes by their own instability. But once you see preparation, you can't unsee intent. And here's where this story becomes bigger than 3 coworkers, because halfway down this descent, I need you to do something. If you're still here, if you're feeling that sharpening awareness in your chest, comment this phrase twice. I see the pattern. Not once, twice, because repetition reinforces identity, and identity determines survival.
Good. Now we go deeper. I see the pattern. If you've written it twice, you've already done something most men never do. You acknowledged the structure beneath the surface. Because these aren't random horror stories, they follow a blueprint. Access, observation, isolation, and control. Every single time. Alex began with psychological occupation. Sean escalated through digital surveillance. Tom engineered physical confinement. Different environments, same architecture. And here's the uncomfortable truth. These men didn't look like monsters. They looked like coworkers. That's what makes this dangerous. Modern institutions force trust through proximity. You share space with strangers daily. You learn their coffee order before you learn their character. And predators thrive inside environments that assume safety. Fluorescent lights don't make you safe. Open offices don't make you safe. Group chats don't make you safe. Familiarity lowers defenses. Predators study that. They don't begin with violence. They begin with testing. How long can I hold eye contact? How many personal questions can I ask? How close can I stand? How late can I message? How much can I access without consequence? Each small violation is data collection. If the target laughs it off, green light. If the target ignores it, green light. If the target rationalizes it, green light. This is not about paranoia. It's about pattern recognition. You are not meant to move through life afraid, but you are meant to move through life aware. The reason these stories hit hard isn't because they're extreme, it's because they're subtle. They unfold slowly, and that's how real danger often works, not with dramatic music, with incremental normalization. A man leaning over a cubicle wall every day.
a coworker casually knowing what show you're watching, a colleague deciding when you can and cannot leave. Each one seems survivable until it isn't. Here's what separates victims from survivors: early detection. The moment your gut tightens, that's information. The moment something feels rehearsed, that's data. The moment someone escalates after rejection, that's confirmation. You don't owe anyone comfort at the expense of your safety. You don't owe politeness to someone who makes your nervous system react. And you certainly don't owe access to anyone who hasn't earned trust. Now, here's the final layer. These stories aren't just warnings, they're training. Because once you see the pattern, you stop being easy to test. And men who can't be tested quietly are far harder to hunt.
Now I'm going to say something most people won't. These stories aren't rare, they're just rarely told with clarity. Every workplace has had a man like Alex. Every small town has had a Sean. Every isolated shift has risked a Tom. Most just never escalate far enough to become headlines. Predatory behavior lives on a spectrum, and the lower levels are tolerated. That's the uncomfortable reality. The guy who stands too close, the coworker who memorizes your schedule, the intern who jokes in a way that makes your skin crawl, the colleague who insists on controlling logistics for your safety. We excuse them because escalation feels dramatic until it happens. But here's where you separate yourself from the average man. You don't wait for escalation to validate instinct. You trust the first signal. Let's break this down psychologically. Predators look for 3 traits in a target: conflict avoidance, social compliance, self-doubt. If you laugh when uncomfortable, you're compliant. If you hesitate to report, you avoid conflict. If you question your gut, you doubt yourself. That's not weakness, that's conditioning. We've been trained to maintain harmony over vigilance, but harmony without boundaries is vulnerability. Alex relied on self-doubt. Sean relied on politeness. Tom relied on isolation. Different tools, same objective: control. And control doesn't always mean physical harm. Sometimes it means psychological dominance, making someone think about you long after you're gone, making them check locks, making them replay your voice in the dark. That's a form of imprinting. Here's the hard truth. Some men crave that imprint. They don't just want attention, they want impact, even if that impact is fear. Especially if that impact is fear, because fear proves influence, and influence feels like power to unstable minds. But you, if you're still here, are not here for fear. You're here for understanding. Understanding removes mystique, and once mystique is gone, power shifts, because the predator relies on unpredictability. Once you recognize the pattern, unpredictability shrinks. Now we descend further, because the most disturbing detail across all 3 stories isn't what happened, it's what didn't. No arrests, no trials, no closure. Just men who vanished back into society, still walking somewhere, still blending in.
No arrest, no mugshot, no final confrontation where justice feels cinematic and clean. Just disappearance. That's the part that unsettles men who think in structure, because we're taught that bad actions produce consequences, that dangerous behavior escalates into obvious crime, that systems eventually catch what slips through. But reality is colder. Most predators don't get caught at the peak of their intent. They drift, they relocate, they reset. Alex was fired, not prosecuted. Sean was restrained, not imprisoned. Tom vanished, not captured. And here's what that implies. Somewhere, in another office, another town, another storm, they could begin again. That doesn't mean you live in fear. It means you stop living naive. The world isn't filled with monsters, but it is filled with unstable men who learn from each encounter. If Alex realized how easy it was to obtain personal information, do you think he forgot that skill? If Sean learned how quickly digital access creates emotional leverage, do you think he abandoned that tactic? If Tom planned physical containment once, do you think the blueprint disappeared with him? Predatory psychology evolves through rehearsal. That's what these stories represent. Rehearsal moments. Moments where the target escaped. Moments where timing interrupted outcome. Moments where something, luck, instinct, resistance, disrupted the trajectory. But imagine the alternate version. What if the phone call hadn't been ignored? What if the window tapping had been dismissed? What if she hadn't checked the backdoor chain? What if she hadn't hidden? Small decisions changed entire futures. And that's the lesson most men overlook. Awareness is not dramatic, it's incremental. It's noticing patterns early enough to alter direction. You don't need to be paranoid, you need to be perceptive. The difference between those two is discipline. Paranoia assumes threat everywhere. Perception evaluates threat accurately. And once you've seen 3 different environments produce the same behavioral arc, you start to understand something deeper. This isn't about workplaces. It's about human nature under weak accountability. It's about what happens when unstable minds gain proximity without scrutiny. And it's about why your instincts exist for a reason. We're not finished, because the final descent isn't about them. It's about you. Now we turn the lens. Because if you've been listening closely, you'll realize something uncomfortable. You are not just capable of being targeted. You are also capable of becoming blind. Blind to patterns, blind to escalation, blind to your own tolerance thresholds. Every man believes he would act decisively until he's in the moment, until social pressure whispers, "Don't make this awkward," until the environment feels too professional to cause a scene, until the discomfort feels too small to justify confrontation. That's the psychological battlefield. Predators don't overpower strength, they exploit hesitation. Alex didn't threaten first, he conditioned presence. Sean didn't attack first, he gathered data. Tom didn't grab first, he engineered containment. Each one moved gradually, because gradual escalation avoids alarm systems, both institutional and internal. Your nervous system detects subtle irregularities before your logic does. But logic is loud. Logic says, "You're overthinking." Logic says, "He's just awkward." Logic says, "You don't want to ruin someone's job." Instinct whispers. Logic negotiates. Predators benefit from negotiation. Let me ask you something serious. When was the last time you ignored a gut feeling because it wasn't convenient? When did you override discomfort because you didn't want to appear dramatic? Those micro decisions compound. You don't need to live aggressively, but you do need boundaries so firm they don't require apology. A man who communicates boundaries early becomes difficult to test. A man who observes quietly but acts decisively becomes unpredictable to manipulators. And unpredictability to a predator is risk. Risk makes them retreat. The 3 survivors in these stories did one thing right. They acted when escalation crossed a line. They documented, they reported, they exited. They didn't wait for violence, they responded to pattern. That's the difference between a close call and a headline. Now here's the deeper layer. These stories are about coworkers, but proximity exists everywhere. Gyms, friend groups, apartment complexes, online communities. Access is easier than ever. Information is searchable. Schedules are predictable. And unstable men don't need supernatural power. They need opportunity. So the real question isn't, are there predators out there? There are. The real question is, are you trained to detect them early? Because once you are, you don't panic, you calculate. And men who calculate don't become easy targets.
Let's strip this down to something raw. Every one of these men revealed themselves before the peak moment. Not with violence, with pattern. Alex didn't teleport into a backyard. He rehearsed proximity at work. Sean didn't start with threats. He started with questions. Tom didn't begin with locked doors. He began with constant presence. Predatory behavior almost always begins with rehearsal, testing tolerance, measuring reaction, mapping routines. And here's the hard part. Most people fail the rehearsal stage, not because they're weak, because they're polite. Politeness is social glue, but in the wrong hands, it becomes access. When someone stands too close and you don't step back, data collected. When someone texts too late and you still respond, data collected. When someone jokes in a way that unsettles you and you laugh, data collected. You are communicating your tolerance without realizing it, and unstable men pay attention to tolerance, because tolerance determines effort required. Predators seek low resistance, not because they're brave, because they're calculating. Alex focused on one target. Sean escalated when rejected. Tom locked exits before isolating. All three displayed one core trait. They valued control over connection. That's your red flag. Normal men seek mutual interest. Predatory men seek leverage. Leverage can be information. Leverage can be isolation. Leverage can be psychological imprint. Once you understand that distinction, your lens changes. You stop evaluating people based on charm or awkwardness. You start evaluating them based on behavior consistency. Do their actions increase autonomy around them or reduce it? Do they respect boundaries immediately or test them repeatedly? Do they escalate after rejection or retreat with dignity? These questions matter because the difference between an awkward man and a dangerous one is not personality, it's entitlement. Entitlement to access you, entitlement to override your comfort, entitlement to control circumstances. The moment you detect entitlement, you act, not aggressively, decisively. Document, distance, disengage. You don't wait for the story to become dramatic, you end it early. Because the most powerful move a man can make in dangerous proximity is exit before escalation. We're descending further because there's one more layer most men don't want to confront. Here's the layer most men don't want to face. Sometimes the danger isn't dramatic. It's mundane. Fluorescent lights, break rooms, group chats, rainstorms, cubicle walls. Ordinary settings create extraordinary blind spots. Why? Because your brain categorizes environments as safe or unsafe. Alley at midnight? Unsafe. Corporate office at 2 p.m.? Safe. Small-town grocery store? Safe. Insurance office during business hours? Safe. Predators exploit perceived safety. They don't need to hide in darkness if they can hide in routine. Alex didn't stalk from an alley first. He leaned over a cubicle. Sean didn't break in immediately. He asked about a TV show. Tom didn't brandish a weapon. He locked doors under the guise of protection. The environment shielded them. And that's the key insight. When surroundings feel normal, your vigilance drops. That drop is opportunity. You need to recalibrate something internally. Safety is not determined by location. It's determined by behavior. A man in a suit can be more dangerous than a man in a hoodie.
A coworker badge doesn't equal character. A shared shift doesn't equal trust. The world you operate in runs on assumption. Assumption that HR policies deter instability. Assumption that small towns limit threat. Assumption that professionalism filters predators. But systems manage paperwork. They don't manage pathology. And pathology doesn't announce itself clearly. It leaks out in fragments. Long eye contact, repetitive proximity, information known without permission, boundary testing disguised as humor. These are fragments. If you collect them early, the pattern becomes obvious. If you ignore them, the fragments assemble themselves into escalation. Now here's something critical. Awareness does not mean aggression. It means calibration. You don't confront every odd person. You observe trajectory. Is behavior stabilizing or intensifying? Is distance respected or invaded? Is rejection accepted or challenged? These three questions can save months of psychological damage. And make no mistake, psychological damage is real. The sound of laughter in a backyard at dawn, the tapping at a window at night, the flashlight glow under a door during a storm, those images stay, not because of what happened, but because of what almost happened. And almost can haunt a man longer than certainty. We're not finished yet, because the final descent is about power and how to reclaim it.
This is the final layer. Power. Not physical power, not dominance, psychological power. The men in these stories were chasing it. Not connection, not love, not even necessarily violence. Power. The power to occupy someone's thoughts, the power to dictate someone's movements, the power to make someone check locks twice. To unstable minds, that feeling is intoxicating, because control over another person feels like proof of significance. I can alter your behavior. That's the high. But here's what breaks the illusion. Power only exists where access is granted. Access to your time, access to your routines, access to your reactions, access to your hesitation. When access is removed early, the illusion collapses. Alex lost power when documentation began. Sean lost power when police became involved. Tom lost power the moment his target escaped and spoke. Exposure is kryptonite to predatory psychology, because most predators rely on ambiguity. They operate in gray space, unreported discomfort, unwritten incidents, unspoken fear. The moment you drag gray into light, control fractures. This is why early action matters. Not because every awkward interaction hides a villain, but because patterns matter more than personalities. You don't need to hate anyone. You don't need to become paranoid. You need 3 skills: pattern recognition, boundary enforcement, decisive exit. That's it. If someone escalates after rejection, you log it. If someone invades proximity repeatedly, you distance. If someone gathers information without consent, you cut access. No speeches, no debates, no drawn-out emotional labor, just action. And here's the final truth. Most men who behave this way rely on one assumption, that she won't make it complicated. When you make it documented, when you make it formal, when you make it visible, you become complicated. And complicated targets are abandoned for easier ones. That's how you reclaim power. Not through force, through clarity. You are not responsible for fixing unstable men. You are responsible for not ignoring unstable patterns. That's the distinction. And once you internalize that, you stop surviving close calls. You prevent them. End of descent.